Okay. Do you have? Okay. Do you have me on the wide view?
I think it is, though we only need it on the wide view when there's no one here to turn the camera.
Okay.
Oh, Tim said that you had thought about it.
All right. They tell me we're on air, so come on in, grab a seat. We'll get started. I think also we have the view where I can walk around and not disappear from the camera. So, okay, they're nodding their heads. That's good. It's good to see everybody. If you'll be turning to Luke, the 11th chapter, and if somebody can grab those doors back there and pull them to, that would be good. It's good to have you, whether you're here in person or joining us online. Hopefully tonight we're going to cover the rest of chapter 11. To get us started, I want you to think about your five senses, okay? You got five senses: hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch. If you had to give up completely one of your senses, which one would you give up? Teresa thought about it for a little bit. She said, I don't want to give any of them up. Okay, but if you had to give up one, yeah, James?
Eyes.
You would give up your eyes first. That would be the one that you would go ahead and give up.
There's a reason behind it, because the rest of them you can see with.
Okay.
Because of touch, because of the air, you can feel it, let alone see it.
Well, James has single-handedly destroyed my first point, okay? And we'll come back to that in a minute. That's really, really kind of humorous. Okay, Jim.
Smell.
Okay, that's kind of an easy one for me. That would be the one, okay? It would be horrible to give up your taste, and, you know, it would be like coffee is now. You know, if they could get a coffee that tasted as good as it smelled, you know, you would make a fortune. But it would be even worse if you could smell it and not taste it at all, okay? Other than James, do you think there's anybody in the world that would say that the first sense that they would give, if they only had to give up one, that the first one they would give up would be their sight? James, I think you're in a real minority, okay? I can imagine a musician, okay, maybe being willing to give up their sight to maintain their hearing. You know, I could see that. But there is something so important about our ability to see. You know, while we get information from touch and smelling and tasting stuff, there is so much information that we take in and that we get. So much frame of reference, ability to move around and not trip and fall and to run into stuff, even though some of us with great sight still manage to do that a lot. You know, there's just something so really valuable about our sight. And so the passage that we're going to look at starts out with Jesus talking about that. And it's... Maybe before we read it, here's another question. Can you think of some other biblical examples that revolved around sight, the ability to see or the ability to not see? A couple of big Old Testament characters that ought to come to mind with that.
Well, I was thinking of Elijah when he was surrounded by those armies, and his helper couldn't see him, but he could.
Okay. And that's actually a good example, because Jesus is going to talk about, I think, make a comparison here between physical sight and spiritual sight and how important that is, okay? Real famous biblical character. Had his eyes poked out. Okay, Samson, okay? What happened with Saul on the way to Damascus? Bright light, okay? So bright that he was blinded by it, okay? And the folks that were with him, I don't know that the folks were blinded like Saul, but they couldn't see. Nobody could see. This theme of light and being able to see is something that when you start looking at it is woven all the way through scriptures. Okay? And Jesus already back in chapter 8 has talked about, you know, those who have eyes, let them see, and those who have ears, let them hear. And pointing out that folks who ought to be understanding what he was saying or recognizing who he is were not doing that. And so he says this beginning in verse 33. No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, he puts it on a stand so that those who come in may see the light. Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are good, your whole body also is full of light. But when they are bad, your body also is full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light, and no part of it dark, it will be completely lighted, as when the light of a lamp shines on you. This is a strange set of verses. Okay? And I don't know that I've ever heard an entire sermon built around these verses. Tim, have you ever preached a sermon about it? You know, we kind of get to it, and he says some things that we sort of understand, and we sort of, we kind of nod, and yeah, we, maybe relate it to other things that he said, about a city set on a hill, can't be hid, and we think about cities, lit at night and being able to see it, and let your light so shine before men. Those are a little more easy for us to understand and to apply to ourselves. But we get to this, and it's kind of like, yes, it's sort of like that, and yeah, what's on the inside needs to match what's on the outside, and we make a couple of little points about it, and then we move on. And I think maybe we leave some things on the table when we do that. And a big question for me is, why in the world does Jesus say this here? What's the context of this? Is this just he's rambling on and teaching stuff, and all of a sudden, he switches gears and he just throws some other stuff out there? Any thoughts about why Jesus goes here at this time? And in fact, before you answer that, let's talk a little bit about the context. What's been going on in this section of chapter 11? What's Jesus been doing? Okay, he's been warning. He's been doing a little more than warning. He's been healing people, and they accused him of being in league with the devil. Okay.
Driving out demons.
What's that?
Driving out demons.
Okay, driving out demons and being accused of doing that because he was in league with the devil. And as we talked about at some length last week, he just obliterates that argument. Just throws it right back in their face, and they have no response. And really puts it on them about the fact, hey, if I'm not in league with the devil and I'm doing this and I'm greater, my power is greater than that of the demons, you guys aren't recognizing what's in front. You guys aren't seeing what's in front of you. Okay? I thought I saw another. Yeah, Jim.
I think it's maybe the same thing you're saying there at the end, that he basically tells them, you're going to be judged harshly because you had something, you have the light in front of you, but you're full of darkness, and you can't perceive it, or you won't perceive it.
Okay, that's where he goes next. Okay, first he gets accused by religious leaders and spiritual folks that he's in league with the devil, and he wipes that out. But as we pointed out last week, they were also asked, after seeing him throw out demons and all the other things that they've seen him do, they were wanting a sign. Show us a sign from heaven, okay? If you're not in league with the devil and you're that strong, show us a sign from heaven. And in verses 29 through 32, he just gets right in their face and tells them that the Gentiles in Nineveh, and the Gentile queen of Sheba on the day of judgment is going to rise up and condemn you because they recognized what was in front of them and they responded to it, and you guys are not. And probably your Bible has a little paragraph division between that discussion and the verses that we just read about the lamp and eyesight and all. But it's all, Jesus doesn't pause there and say, okay, now I'm going to talk about a different subject. It's all part of his response back to the people who are wanting a sign. And he's saying, open your eyes and look and see what's in front of you. Okay? You guys have got a lot of outward spirituality, outward proclaiming and saying that we're looking for the Messiah, and we want to follow Jehovah and we want to do the right thing. The point is, you got it in front of you, and your eyes are not letting it in. Your eyes are the lamp of the. That's what's going to bring it in. Use them, and see what it is that's in front of you. And as it is, you guys, instead of walking in light, you guys are walking in darkness, because you've got in front of you the Messiah, and you're not recognizing him. Okay? So it's all part of that same speech. Jesus, as he's heading to Jerusalem, is not pulling punches. He's not trying to soften people up so that when he gets there, things won't be quite so bad. It's, I am who I am, and I've got a mission, and I'm going to do it. And if you guys don't recognize it, you're in trouble. You're going to be in a world hurt. Chris?
Well, I think it's interesting that what he says in verse 34 about the lamp of the body is your eye. Watch out in verse 35 that the light in you may not be darkness, because we understand what it's like to put sunglasses on.
Okay.
If there's too much light or something, we will put glasses on, and it'll adjust our vision so that we can see, we can stand the light, or we can focus on what it is we need to focus on. But what he's trying to say, I think, with them is that you're not seeing correctly.
Okay.
You think what you're seeing is, what you want to see, but you're not seeing it right.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting, as he gets closer and closer to the cross, his teaching, his rhetoric, his conversation is more and more bold. He doesn't hold back. And like you said, when he's getting there, he's not trying to smooth things over. He's actually stirring them up. And you see that. One of the passages that I've been reading a lot lately is John 14 through 17. And that's the last thing he said on the planet to the apostles before the Garden of Gethsemane. And that was some of the most raw and spiritual teaching that he gave them the whole time he was there. He just pulled the veil off and spoke about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and their relationship. And there's things in that section we don't see anywhere else as clearly talked about in the whole Bible. But it's like his last chance to do a download into him before he went to the garden, and the next thing was crucifixion.
Okay. I think before we get away from these verses, it's easy to sort of stay where we are in what we just said, and really get down on those folks who saw Jesus in person and should have recognized it and didn't. Okay? But the comparison that Jesus, or the analogy that he's drawing here, is the difference between inner light and outer light. A city set on a hill can't be hid, and especially at night, because it's lit up. How do you light up? What sort of lights are you seeing at night of a city set on a hill? Are they lights on the inside? Maybe through some windows. Okay? When you're out driving now, when you're coming in from Ocala down this way, you see a glow from the city. Those are not internal lights, those are external lights. And Jesus is saying, you guys have got you've got this external light thing of you're saying the right things in some cases, okay? And you're giving lip service to the fact that you want to obey God and that you want to be faithful to Him, but you're dark on the inside. The light that people need to see is not stuff that, you don't buy those little solar lights, at Dollar Tree. I was just in Dollar Tree a few minutes ago, and set them in the yard, and you light up everything. Your eye is the lamp of the body. Let the light on the inside so that what shines through is not some external form of something that you've done, but it's coming from your heart. They're seeing what you're really thinking and what's really important. And that's the light that needs to shine. And I think that is an application for us from these verses. Because it's easy for us to get into a form of stuff. I mean, you guys are here on Wednesday night, you're the guys here for extra credit, and so it's easy to do those kind of external things and, forget about our heart. And Jesus is warning about that. So Jesus has spent a half chapter here or more really getting in the faces and getting on people and rebuking them. And a chapter earlier, the parable of the Good Samaritan was basically a rebuke of one of the experts of the law. And so this section ends and begins in verse 37 with, when Jesus had finished speaking, okay, he's just finished laying everybody out. There are no questions, there are no challenges, there are no but going on. And it says, when he had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. We've already read about how these guys are already mumbling and grumbling. Why in the world would the Pharisee invite Jesus to his house? And why would Jesus agree to go? Any thoughts about that? Back in the back.
He could have been trying to catch him slipping up.
Okay. I think that's definitely a part of what's going here. James?
We need to understand where the Pharisee stood. He wanted to make sure that his steps to heaven was a positive instead of a negative.
Okay. And we're going to find out where the heart of this Pharisee is. And maybe part of that, James, is the reason Jesus agreed to go is for the strength of his rebukes and the strength of his, you guys have not got it right. He didn't go, I'm not going to have anything to do with you anymore. Your time is up. Don't even talk to me. It's like, I got nothing to hide. I can deal with anything that you're going to throw me. Okay, I'll come to your house. It's interesting. One of the references I found this afternoon said that where the scripture says he invited him to his house to eat, that the word that's used there indicates that he invited him over for breakfast. Okay, which is not the meal that you invite somebody over when you're wanting to show them respect. I mean, if you're having a birthday party for somebody, Peter, and or you're throwing a celebratory or an honoring sort of thing, you have them over for dinner. Okay, and we have times when Jesus was invited there. This guy says, come over and eat breakfast with me. I don't know what sort of tone of voice was used, but just the idea of, just maybe it was, you and me, Jesus. We need. I hear the things you say. We need to talk. Or maybe it's as James said, I get him alone. This guy can't be all that. He's got to slip up. He's got to make him. Just come on over and eat with me. All right, Matt, we got a comment over here.
I need it, but anyway, I do think that he was trying to catch Jesus in something, but I think Jesus was and is a master teacher, and anything that any question that they could throw his way, he was going to have an answer for it. As a teacher, when I go in to teach a unit that I am 100% comfortable with, I'm like, okay, I can anticipate the kids' questions and have answers ready. There is one particular unit that I teach that I've been teaching for years, and I hate it, and I don't understand it. And so when I get to it, I'm always really hesitant about going into class because I'm like, okay, what if they ask me this? And what if they ask me that? I don't have an answer. But Jesus always had an answer. And so it did not bother him to
Nothing
go
to
into
fear.
situations like that.
You're the creator of the universe. You got nothing to fear. Or you come, before Tim comes in, or you come in and you start a class with an example, and your first answer blows your whole point. So, all right, Tim.
And I think it's also possible this Pharisee was interested in what Jesus had to say.
Okay.
You know, Saul of Tarsus was a Pharisee who thought he was pleasing God.
Okay.
This might have been a man who really wanted to please God and wasn't quite sure where Jesus fit into all that.
Okay, maybe so. However, it goes downhill really quick in the next verse. Jim?
Well, if it's right that it was a morning meal, a breakfast, I don't know about their culture then, but today that's usually a time. Now, back then they didn't have Denny's and, you know.
Okay.
But for us, that's usually like an intimate, a one-on-one. Hey, let's get together. Let's get breakfast. Now, maybe the Pharisees showed up because they saw, Jesus is there, and we want to. I don't know, but I think he might have been curious, and really, but Jesus, he saw it as an opportunity to teach and to reach.
I'm not sure we understand completely the cultural difference of the different meals. By the end of this discussion, there are clearly other folks that are there. And maybe it was a time to get Jesus off away from the crowds, because when they gave the dinner meals, they were out in the courtyard and people were able to stand around and see and watch. Don't know that necessarily was happening here. There's not any reference to the crowd there. But at any rate, he invites him and Jesus agrees to go. And in the very next verse, but the Pharisee, noticing that Jesus did not first wash before the meal, was surprised. Okay, not, aha, I knew he wouldn't. He's surprised that he doesn't do it. Now, here culturally, we got to understand, okay, is he Jesus' mom saying, you go back and you wash your hands before you're not going to eat before you wash? What's going on here? What's the deal with washing before you eat? It was not, I don't think it was till the 1800s that the medical profession started washing their hands associated with medical procedures. And the first guy who suggested it, I think maybe was even drummed out of the profession, okay? Because that's crazy. So this is not about getting physical germs off his hands. Got Chris and then James.
Well, I've got the New American Standard, and it says that he was surprised he was not first ceremonially washed
Okay.
before the meal, but the actual word in the footnote is baptized.
Okay.
So there's some interesting word play.
Well, that is interesting, particularly when I describe to you in a minute what I understand the procedure was. Okay, James?
He wanted to make sure that he was clean
Okay.
for the meal.
Okay, it's about,
And
in the
it
Pharisees'
is-
mind, it was about being spiritually clean, not
Physically
okay.
clean.
All right.
But-
There are all kinds of rules in the old law about what makes you clean and what makes you unclean.
But they was going by Moses' law
Okay.
of being clean.
Okay, well, the Pharisees had taken the law of Moses and made up some additional rules about how to make, if you will do these things, this is a way that you make sure that you're clean under the law of Moses. Not a part of the law of Moses. And one of them was a very elaborate procedure for ceremonially cleaning your hands before you eat. And it was a process that I've had described as it was prescribed exactly where you put the water and the angle you held your hands and where you let the water run and what you did with your fingertips, and that you did that twice in a very prescribed and specific way. And then you did it again between every course of the meal. And the Pharisees believed that if you did not do this, you were sinning. Okay? Not in the law of Moses. So here's Jesus. Did Jesus not know this ritual? I think he knew it. So did he not do it on purpose? Why? Orlando.
You know, as Jesus was coming into, he was trying to right some wrongs, I guess you could say, in a lot of different ways, and coming in, establishing himself as, through the way, being the new law. You know, he was just basically, I think, showing them some of these rules and things that you have come up with, because remember, in the Old Testament, they were given certain things to follow by, and then all of a sudden, it's like they add something else onto it, and they add another layer to it, and this might have been one of those things that just kind of over time got added on and added on to, and Jesus is coming in and saying, is this what's really important?
Okay.
So I think that he was challenging that.
All right. I think it's an extension of what we just talked about with the eyesight and the light being on the inside. Because look at when the Pharisee questions him, say, well, why didn't you do this? You know, and I don't know that he said anything. He just said he was surprised, okay, which probably was visible on his face. Jimmy, you got something before we?
I just think everything Jesus is talking about is in reference to the inside.
Yeah.
And Pharisees, you know, they focus on the outward appearance.
Okay.
But Jesus said it's not the outward appearance that matters, it's the inward.
Okay,
It's
and
what's
that's
inside.
exactly where he goes in verse 39. The Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish. Acknowledges that the Pharisees are doing some outward things that at least, you know, have the appearance of being spiritual. He says, you wash you clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. Okay, you've invited this guy over for dinner. He doesn't do what your family normally does, and you're surprised about it. He says, well, you're full of greed and wickedness. He's pretty pointed with him here. You guys are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside only? Give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be clean to you. We're going to see more before we end this about the selfishness and the greed of both the Pharisees and the experts in the law. Had them making themselves rich at the expense of the poor and ignoring the needs of the poor. Woe to you Pharisees, verse 42, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. Okay, he's not done yet, but first he says, this is not about me washing my hands. This is about the fact that you're trying to be clean by cleaning the outside, but inside you're just greedy and wicked. And before you say, oh, but look at all the things that we tithe and the things that we give and the money that we give, what are you talking about? It's like, okay, you do those things, but you're neglecting justice and the love of God. Because in many ways, they were doing these things and trying to bind them, things that were beyond the law of Moses, and bind them on others, or if not bind them on them, use them as a way to exalt themselves and exclude others from being included in their little clique. And so rather than being leaders, being people that were drawing people closer to God. They were the blind guides that were keeping people away from God by the way that they were behaving. And certainly we have a lot of folks in the world today who look at some really, really terrible examples of people trying to be spiritual, and it drives them away. It still happens today. And so it's important for us to be consistent on the inside with the outside. Yes, Jeannie.
We have to always be careful to keep that inside clean of our hearts, because I was one of those people that looked at people that were religious and said, well, why should I become a Christian? They do the same thing I do, you know. But they were more interested in looking good versus being good.
I think we should not go too fast past the verse where he tells them, you should not have neglected the former. You know, you should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. In other words, sometimes we want to go, we like extremes, okay? Give me all these rules, tell me exactly what I've got to do, give me the checklist so that I can do them, and I know everything's okay. And neglect justice and the love of God. Then on the other side, we've got the, look at those guys, look, they do all those things, but look at their character. So I don't want to do any of those things that they're doing, okay? Even though some of them were good. Some of the things were parts of the law of Moses. I don't want to do those things. I just want to run around and love everybody and, you know, wish karma on folks and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And Jesus says, don't do that. You know, do those things that you're supposed to do. Okay? Things that the scriptures call you, don't forget about them. But don't be so consumed with the form of them that you miss the heart. You miss mercy and forgiveness and the love of God and justice and those things. They're both important. Okay? And says, you guys are not doing that. Woe to you. Anybody in here ever said woe to you to anybody? You know, we just don't express ourselves that way, but he's saying, you guys watch out. You guys are in trouble because this is what you're doing instead of what you should be doing. And he goes on, woe to you, Pharisees, verse 43, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace. The way synagogues were set up, the more important that you were, the more you got. Unlike today, when we come into service and, you know, nobody's on the front 3 rows. If you were important in the synagogue, you wanted the front row because it showed how important you were. And additionally, those rows were actually facing the audience, so that when you got those seats, you got them and everybody got to see how important that you were. And Jesus says, you know, that's what you're into. You're not into wanting God's approval. You want folks to see you and to recognize, oh, look at that guy. And greetings in the marketplace. We've talked some about the experts in the law. He's going to get them in a minute. But they particularly were interested in and almost demanded that people defer to them when they were out in public. Move out of the way. Let them go first. Give them signs and symbols of respect as they pass. He said, Jesus, that's what you guys are interested in, and that's not what's important. And because of it, you're in trouble. You guys are in trouble because you've got that perspective. Woe to you. And he says, maybe one of the harshest things that he says that we read past so quickly, he says, woe to you because you are like unmarked graves which men walk over without knowing. In other places, I'm not sure we've read it yet here in Luke, it comes up later, and certainly Matthew writes about where Jesus calls them whitewashed tombs. Okay, you know why you whitewash a tomb? so you don't touch it by accident. If you touch anything that's dead, and especially if you're around graves and human remains, you're unclean for a week under the law of Moses. And so there was lots of care taken to, I don't want to accidentally, stumble over a tomb, and so they whitewashed them, so they were clear. So when Jesus says you guys are whitewashed tombs, he's saying you guys are dead on the inside. And here he says it's even worse because you're not even, in many ways, you're not even whitewashed. And people are stumbling over your example and you are making people unclean. Not the tombs, not these rules that you're binding on people. You are making people unclean. Whew. Who invited this guy to breakfast? Okay, Chris?
Yeah, he wasn't a very good breakfast guest there, I think. This whole passage, this whole section reminds me of how Jesus was trying to say, look, you've had hundreds and hundreds of years of developing all these regulations and rules and adding on top of the law things that God hadn't even called for and making it so onerous that people couldn't even live it. He said in one place that you won't even lift your own finger to help with all these burdens that you've laid on everybody. But it kind of it made me think about in high school with the lunchroom. I don't know why this popped into my mind, but I was thinking about the fact that there are the cool kids that have the cool tables, and they hang out together, and none of the other kids are invited. And if you're had a deformation or a birth defect, or were one of the handicapped folks, they not only wouldn't let you sit with them, they made fun of you while you walked by. And then there were the kids that were the empathetic ones that would go and sit with those children and help them and be friends with them. And the other people would laugh at them for even being around them.
Okay.
And it's like the children in the marketplace, the example that he gives. And to me, this is Jesus trying to say, look, you're those kids that have berated and downtrodden the people around you because they're not up to your standard, and you even prevent those that would try to do those good things and take people in and encourage them. You're laughing at them while they're doing it. And Jesus was the prime example of that. He's trying to save the world and bring in the tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes and bring people to God, which was supposed to be their job, and they weren't even thinking about that.
Okay. The contrast is the Pharisees and the experts in the law were going, look at the stuff that we're doing. You should be like us, but we know you can't do it. And Jesus is over here saying, come unto me, all you who are the heavy laden. Okay? I'm here to help. The difference in leadership, the difference in spirituality, the difference in focus in terms of what they're about. And so Jesus lays it out. And again, Jesus is not giving up on them. This is not a look, I don't want anything to do with you. This is, I'm telling you like it is. You should thank me that I'm willing to tell you the truth as opposed to let you continue in your delusion. Okay? Well, it takes, I think, a humorous turn. Because Jesus said, woe to you Pharisees. All right, let's get a comment over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Just like you were saying about, this is, he's going to the leadership, because that's where the problem is.
Yeah.
And it's an example for us not to follow bad leadership. And like I say, Jesus always gives a warning for the judgment sits. Okay. And so he's giving them a stern warning. Get your act together.
Okay.
And knocking them off their high horses because they had elevated themselves and not looking out for the poor. The Lord always looks out for the poor. So they had forgot that part of the law. So Jesus had to remind them, give them a stern rebuke, get yourself in order.
Okay? In human terms, we would go, look, those guys don't have a clue. I'm done with them. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to their house to eat. I'm not going to answer their questions. You know, they're just going to try to trip me up, so I'm just done with them. Jesus is not doing that. But he's telling them the truth. Okay? And so it's been 3, woe to you Pharisees. You Pharisees are in trouble. Verse 45, one of the experts in the law answered him, Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us as well. I don't know how many experts in the law there were there, but I bet some of them were rolling their eyes. Oh, don't go there. don't say that. Okay, or maybe they are. Maybe it's in their pride and their arrogance. It's like, well, yeah, those Pharisees, they're not as smart as we are, but we're the intelligentsia. We're the folks that have studied and really know. We're the folks who are, you know, the Pharisees came up with these 600 rules or whatever. We're the ones on a day-to-day basis still providing interpretations on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Well, Jesus, are we in trouble? Because look at what we're doing. Jesus replied, and you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. Another passage, I'm not sure we've read it already, they were actively involved in extorting widows out of money. They could go and demand money, and they would make up rules. Okay, and they'd made up rules. For example, you could only travel so far on the Sabbath. Okay? Well, if you went out the night before and you left a meal right at the limit of how far you could go, you know, and you did that for a couple of stops down, well, then it was okay for you to go there, have a meal, and then you could travel further and you weren't breaking law. They made that rule up. Law of Moses says you weren't supposed to tie knots, okay, on the Sabbath. But it was okay if you were a woman, if you had a girdle, you could tie your girdle. So, if you had something you had to bind up or to lift or to carry, if you bound it up with a woman's girdle on the Sabbath, that was okay. That was fine. You could just go right. That's the kind of thinking that was going on there. Okay? And you say you're making up rules and you're laying burdens, and you don't help anybody. You're there in your smug, self-satisfied thinking you're the smartest guy in the room, and woe to you. You're in trouble. And he goes on, woe to you, because you build tombs for the prophets, and it was your forefathers who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your forefathers did. They killed the prophets, and you build their tombs. And because of this, God in his wisdom said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill, and others they will persecute. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that have been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for this. So I've read this through before, and I've tried to think of situations where prophets were killed in the Old Testament. And I can think of bad things happening to prophets because of, you know, captivity and enemies and, you know, maybe a bad king trying to get an Elijah or whatever. But, you know, this killed the prophets. Your homework for next week is to go to, I think it's 1 Chronicles 24. Read through chapter 24 of 1 Chronicles about Zechariah and what happens, and we'll talk about it a little bit next week. But Jesus can't be any more in the face of these guys about things that they held to be important, and that things that they were, what really was going on, and things they were guilty of and going to be held responsible for. And we will start with that next week. It's interesting reading, and you might find yourself going back a chapter on either side of it to sort of get the flow of it. But it's, I got to tell you, it's been a while since I've read that, and it's like, oh, so that's what he's talking about. And we'll start with that next week. Let's close out with a prayer. God, we thank you for this evening, for being able to be together. Thank you for making us a body and being able to share in our lives here. Thank you for this congregation, for its leadership, for the people that are here, the friendships that we have, the relationships. Pray that you will help us to really love each other. Help us to do all the things that are important without neglecting justice and your love. Give us discernment and wisdom, and help us to use our eyes to really see what's out there, to have spiritual insight, and to not just clean the outside of the cup. God, we thank you for your mercy, because we struggle. We have passions and desires and make bad decisions. We're grateful for your grace and your mercy and for the forgiveness that you provided through your Son. And we close up tonight and ask you to watch over us and bless our day tomorrow. Coming to you in the name of your Son. Amen.